Take a moment to look at your life. Everything you do, everything you think, everything you feel revolves around a single idea. Who do you believe you are? But here's the uncomfortable truth you don't want to hear. All of that is a lie. Your identity is nothing but a fragile construction. A house of cards built by the ego to give you the illusion of control. But the truth is, you don't have control. You don't have anything. The ego, that little voice in your head that insists you exist as something solid and permanent, is the greatest fraud that has ever existed. It has taken your fears, your traumas, your achievements, and wrapped them in a convincing narrative. This is me. But that me is nothing but a mirage. Everything you consider yours, your opinions, your beliefs, your accomplishments, are borrowed. You absorbed those ideas without questioning them and called them my truth. But there is no truth in the ego, only noise. As Simone Weil said, imagination constantly works to fill every gap because it cannot bear the void. That is the ego, a machine that fills emptiness. It constantly needs stories, dramas, labels to feed on. I am successful. I am a failure. I am happy. I am miserable. But all of that is just foam on the surface. None of it is truly you. The ego doesn't know how to rest in emptiness, because in emptiness it ceases to exist. Do you want to know how the trick works? It's simple. The ego tells you that you are unique, special, important. But that importance always depends on something external. Your job, your partner, your looks, your achievements. The ego sells you an identity that requires constant validation, because without that validation, it disappears. And you, like a faithful slave, do everything possible to keep the illusion alive. Here comes the hard blow. The more you reinforce that identity, the further you move away from what you really are. Because here is the truth. There is nothing solid in you. There is no fixed, permanent, eternal self. Everything you are is change, flow, emptiness. But that truth terrifies the ego. So it invents stories, puts on masks, and convinces you that those masks are you. Alan Watts explained it clearly. Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. But that doesn't stop you. You spend your life searching for definitions, building walls to protect something that doesn't even exist. Because the ego is nothing more than a reflection, a projection of your fears, desires, and attachments. And all of that is what keeps you trapped. The life you're living isn't yours. It's a script the ego wrote for you. It told you that you had to be someone, achieve something, leave a mark. But all of that is a trap. It's a race you cannot win because there is no finish line. The ego always wants more. More success, more love, more recognition. And when it doesn't get it, it feeds on suffering. The ego lives off your failures just as much as your victories, because what matters is not what you achieve, but that you keep feeding it. Nietzsche summed it up. Man suffers so deeply in the world that he was compelled to invent laughter. But the laughter of the ego is bitter, because it is always hiding the void. That's the truth you don't want to face. That beneath all your masks, beneath all your achievements, there is nothing. And that nothing is not a problem. It is the liberation you fear the most. The ego is clever. It convinces you that you need it in order to survive. It whispers that without it you'll be lost, that you'll disappear. And you believe it because you've never dared to live without it. You've never had the courage to face the void and stop fighting against it. The ego is not destroyed by force, it dissolves through clarity. And clarity is the last thing it wants. Can you admit that your life has been a theater, and that you were just the actor reciting lines that were given to you? That's the question the ego never wants you to ask. Because the moment you do, the curtain begins to fall. And when it falls, nothing remains. Only the void. Only the truth. Only you, without masks, without stories, without ego. The real trap of the ego is not only that it's a lie, but that it makes you believe that without it you are lost. That is its masterstroke. It convinces you that it's your ally, that it protects you from chaos, that it gives you purpose. But the truth is this. The ego is not your protector, it's your jailer. It is the prison you built yourself, the one you choose to remain in because you fear what lies beyond its walls. The ego feeds on your suffering because that is its only fuel. It needs you to feel incomplete, to crave more, to fear losing what you've accumulated. Every worry, every desire, every insecurity is another brick in the walls of your prison. And the cruelest part is that it makes you believe you're fighting for freedom when in reality you're just tightening your chains. Schopenhauer said it bluntly, life is a constant conflict between desire and reality. But what is rarely told is that this conflict is an illusion created by the ego. It is not the world that oppresses you, but the story your ego spins to keep you trapped. Every time you feel like a victim, it's your ego reminding you that you exist as something fragile, separate, always in need of defense. The ego is a master manipulator. It disguises itself as your emotions, your thoughts, even your values. It makes you believe you are free because you can choose, but every choice is conditioned by what the ego needs to survive. It doesn't seek your well-being, it seeks its permanence. That is why you can never truly rest, never simply be. There's always something to do, something to prove, something to achieve. Alan Watts captured it best. The ego is like a ghost trying to hold itself up with one hand. And yet, you believe it. You believe that if you let go, everything will collapse. And in a way, you're right, everything the ego built will collapse. But here's the secret it doesn't want you to know. When the ego falls apart, you lose nothing real. What you lose is the prison. The suffering you feel doesn't come from what the world does to you. It comes from how the ego interprets it. You don't suffer because someone rejects you. You suffer because your ego cannot stand not being loved. You don't suffer because you fail. You suffer because your ego cannot bear not being perfect. You don't suffer because you lose something. You suffer because the ego convinced you that possessing it was part of who you are. And here is the cruelest twist. The ego even takes over your desire to transcend it. Do you want to overcome your suffering? Do you want peace? Perfect. The ego will put on the mask of a spiritual seeker and make you believe you are progressing. But in reality, you are just feeding it again. Even the idea of enlightenment is a creation of the ego. Lao Tzu put it with brutal clarity. The sage seeks nothing because he already has everything. But you cannot accept this because to accept it would mean the ego has nothing left to do. And an ego without a task is an ego that vanishes. So it invents problems that don't exist, goals you don't need, missions that never end. Do you know why you never feel at peace? Because the ego needs conflict in order to survive. It needs you to believe you're incomplete, that something out there will finally make you whole. But here is the truth. You will never find peace as long as you keep feeding the illusion that you are a separate self. Maybe now you're thinking, so what do I do? How do I stop suffering? But that question is itself another trap of the ego. It's not about doing, it's about not doing. It's about ceasing to struggle, to justify, to build more walls. The ego is not destroyed. It dissolves the moment you stop giving it importance. The ego wants you to believe you are trapped. But here's the final blow. The chains aren't real. The only thing keeping you imprisoned is your belief in the prison. Let go of that belief and you will discover something the ego cannot comprehend. There is no prison. There never was. All the suffering, all the fears, all the desires, they were projections. And what remains when the ego disappears is not emptiness. It is freedom. What happens when the ego disappears? This is the secret it never wants you to discover. You don't lose anything real. You lose the mask, you lose the narrative, but what remains is the only thing that was ever there. The emptiness, the truth, the freedom. The paradox of the ego is that its greatest trick is making you believe you need to destroy it. But how can you destroy something that never truly existed? It's not about fighting against the ego, it's about seeing through it. It's about stopping the fight with a shadow and starting to live without its limits. Alan Watts explained it well. Trying to escape the ego is like trying to escape your own shadow. You don't need to escape, you need to stop identifying with it. When you do, you realize you are not a separate being from the world, but the very space in which everything happens. And here is the most important part. That freedom is not an action, it's clarity. It's not about refusing to act. It's about acting without chains. As Lao Tzu said, non-action does not mean doing nothing, it means effortless action. When you act without ego, there is no conflict, no attachment, no suffering. The ego has convinced you that your worth, your identity, and your purpose depend on it. But when you let it go, you realize that everything it tried to protect was just smoke. Life is not about becoming something, it is about simply being. Rumi said it better than anyone. Beyond ideas of right and wrong, there is a field. I will meet you there. That field is life without ego. It is the place where you stop defining yourself, stop justifying yourself, stop searching for what never existed. It is the place where you simply exist. Without the ego, fear disappears. Attachment disappears. The need for control disappears. You stop worrying about what others think, because you no longer need external validation. You stop suffering over what you lose because you finally understand it was never yours. What remains is something the ego could never give you: true peace. And maybe you wonder, how do you live without ego? The answer is simple but not easy. You live now. It's not about seeking something outside yourself, but about releasing what separates you from this moment. The ego always projects you into the future or drags you into the past, but it never lets you be here, now, where life truly happens. This freedom we speak of is not a prize at the end of a long road. It is already here, waiting for you to notice it. But to see it, you must release the stories the ego tells about who you are and what you need. You must dare to do nothing, only to discover that you already are everything. The death of the ego is not the end, it is the beginning. It is the point where you stop merely surviving and start truly living. You don't need to build a new identity or reach some special state. All you need is to stop clinging to what is not real. And when you finally do, you discover something the ego could never understand. Life does not need justification. You don't need to be someone in order to be everything. Thank you for staying until the end. This is a complex subject that I will continue to expand on in future videos. What you've heard here is only an introduction. There are deeper truths waiting to be uncovered, truths that connect both the spiritual world and the material one.